Lost, a Slender story. Creepypastas and urban legends are widely popular among the internet. You think it's all lies because that's what they want you to think to avoid becoming one of them. It's hard to say which ones are real and which ones aren't after the event of my story that I'm about to share with you. And this has brought me into a predicament, and frankly, I'm not sure what to do. I was hanging out at the park, listening to some Mr. Nightmare stories, when my friends instantly recognized Mr. Nightmare and claimed that they were huge fans of creepypasta. I believe my friends, Ethan and Colin, because their mom doesn't care what they look up on the internet. It was hard to believe Joseph though. He went to a private school and his mother seemed very restrictive over what he searched on the internet. We were all discussing urban legends that we had heard like split-mouthed woman and goat man when the term Slender Man was brought up. By then, anyone who had even touched a computer had heard of Slender Man, a tall, faceless, pale man who lived in the woods. I hadn't heard much about him. I had heard a few things here and there, but he was never really the type to appeal to me. In fact, after the stabbing incident was broadcast, my parents literally said, "If you look up anything that has to do with Slender Man, you will get your video games and electronics taken away forever." I just grew an annoyance with the Slender Man character, mostly because I was banned from knowledge of him. I wasn't as stupid as those two girls who stabbed their friend to prove they're a worthy proxy. They told me this years ago and I think they're fine with Slender Man now. Joseph talked so much about the Slender Man that I developed an interest in him. He is tall and lanky man whose skin is pure white and has no facial features. He wears a suit and tie. His tentacles can grow as long as trees in the woods. If you encounter him as a kid, you will start to see static until you're a ghost working for Slender Man. If you encounter him as an adult, he will kill you. He's keeping the children's ghosts until the end of time to create a new world, free of adults. No one knows his backstory, but he is only visible to his victims and on photographs. He's been here since the dawn of time. I let out a slow and dramatic "wow" in amazement of the parts of Slender Man that I hadn't known. What brought him fame was the legitimate sightings of him around the woods of Siban. My face fell. That part had to be a lie. Siban was the name of our town, and while almost half of the town was healthy forest land, it seemed highly unlikely that Slender Man would be sighted here. It sounded too good to be true, but perhaps, maybe it was true. Maybe the Slender Man just happened to be caught here. Well, that's probably the second best legend I've heard, I said as I turned to walk home, knowing that it was time for dinner. "What's the best legend?" asked Darren. I stopped as I turned back to look at the group, who were also packing their things to go home. "Probably Split Moth Woman," I replied, not being sure if that was the best legend I'd heard, but I didn't want to stop and think about it. The next day, as I shared my interest in Slender Man with my classmates, they figured that it was about time I had been interested in him. I got more and more responses, stating that Slender Man was found here. They all said, "Yeah man, Jake Daz saw him. That night, I researched it on the internet. The sightings were from my town. Sibon was a huge urban city in California after all. The urban part of the city was made out of tall buildings and everything in the middle. On one side of it, there was a huge forest, about 200 miles long. On the opposite side, there are suburban neighborhoods. The huge neighborhoods also had a lot of trees around them, almost like it used to be a forest. On another side is the ocean, and on the last side, just plains. Plains and fields. It rains all the time and the sky is almost always gray. I visited Jake one day. What started out as an awkward encounter turned into a deep conversation. "Hey, you're Jake Daz, right?" He looked down at me and replied, "Yep." "Could you show me the pictures of Slender?" "Yeah. Come inside, bro." He showed me the Slender Man in a selfie that he had taken by an abandoned house. No way, this was really legitimate. The Slender Man on the photo was as clear as day. Any idiot could tell if it was photoshopped, but this wasn't. I started to be drawn more to the abandoned house in the picture. It had a circle with an X in it. It was drawn in red, supposedly to look like blood. Or maybe it was actually blood? I decided that I would go look for the abandoned house the next day, and Joseph insisted to go with me. I didn't want him to go. His mother always asks what we're going to be doing, and he always answers the most specific way possible, because he gets in a lot of trouble for lying. "We're going to go play in the woods and look for this famous abandoned house where this mythical being called the Slender Man lives." Before I could facepalm in my head, she actually said we could go. My parents usually say, "Just don't go into the country." What they mean by that is don't cross the open plains. I could do that if I wanted to because I'm not afraid of lying. We stopped at the border between the urban section of the town and the woods. The sky took on a light shade of gray. We parked our bikes near the lamppost by the woods and just kept walking past the trees, hoping that this rumor was not false and that we weren't making fools out of ourselves. I finally saw an old, brown, shed-like house, and as I got closer, I saw the circle with an X in it. There wasn't even a door in the house. I peeked my head into the house and found a note that read, "Slender's house." I tried to take a picture of it when, suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder. "What, Joseph?" I said. Joseph walked over to the note, and then I realized this isn't Joseph's hand on my shoulder. I ripped the hand off of me and turned around. It was him, tall and slender, wearing a suit, although without his tentacles spreading out all over his back. His fingers were so long and pointy that they were almost claws. Joseph and I both saw him and stared at him for about 5 seconds, and bolted out of there. We were running, but he was just teleporting in front of us, only to find out that we had run in the wrong direction. There is no escape now. We're here, lost in the woods. We tried to run, but when we got to where there was supposed to be a clearing, there was just more trees. Every time we ran, we would just end up in the same section of the woods. I'm scared for my life now, and I don't know what to do. Joseph and I need to make it out of this alive, but right now, We're stuck, and my vision is turning to static.